I was born in 1949, in a wooden cabin tucked deep in the Appalachian hills of Kentucky. It was a house my father had built with his own hands, rough logs stacked on top of one another, dirt floor packed tight from the tread of 11 children's feet, and no electricity or running water. There was no need for a lock on the front door because no one ever came and the SI. To an outsider, it might have looked peaceful, modest, but peaceful. But homes, I've learned, are not made of wood or stone. They are made of people. And sometimes what's meant to protect you becomes the very thing that breaks you. I was the second youngest of 11. My earliest memories were of corn husk dolls, chasing fireflies with my younger sister April, and the sound of my mama's hands scrubbing laundry on a washboard by the creek. We were poor, but in the way poor people often are, too busy surviving to feel sorry about it. We had cornbread, beans, sometimes salt pork if we were lucky. Shoes came and went. Laughter did too. Then one summer morning everything changed. My father was bitten by a copperhead while working in the field. There was no car, no phone, no help. He died there, in the arms of my mother and my oldest brother Sebastian. And with him the last thread of safety in our home unraveled. Sebastian was only 19. He'd always been quiet, watchful, strong. When Papa died, he stepped in as the man of the house, and we all looked to him like we were told we should. But something in him had shifted. The burden or the power or perhaps something far darker took root. He started drinking, coming home with whiskey on his breath and rage in his eyes. He'd shout at Mama, and she would bow her head, tired and silent. We all learned to tiptoe, to stay quiet, to never provoke. I thought that was the worst it could get. But then one night when I was just 12, I woke to a hand over my mouth and the smell of sweat, tobacco and fear. It was Sebastian. His whisper promised pain if I screamed. And just like that, the house that had once held my childhood became a place of terror. He told me no one would believe me, that if I spoke, he'd hurt my little brother Peter. And I believed him. It happened again. And again. And eventually, not just from him. Silence became my survival. My mother? She knew. One day I tried to tell her. I whispered it while we hung laundry in the sun. She didn't look at me. Just stared at the hills and said, "Better you than me, girl. That's just how men are." I felt like the air left my body that day. That even the one person who should have fought for me wouldn't. And yet I endured. For years. The dirt floor beneath me held my tears. The log walls held my secrets. And the roof, well, it did nothing to keep out the storm inside. But that's not where my story ends. Because somehow, through the pain, the silence, the betrayals, I found my way back to myself. I lost children. I lost faith. I nearly lost my life. But I also found purpose. I found peace. I found love. Not in romance but in community, in service, in hope. And it all began in that little log cabin in Kentucky. A house with no electricity.
No plumbing.
And no protection. Only a girl, barely more than a whisper, trying to survive in the dark. Until she could find her way to the light. I remember the day my father died like the echo of thunder after a lightning strike. Sudden, loud, and impossible to forget. It was early spring 1959. The earth was just beginning to soften again. And the fields needed turning. I was 10, still too young to plow but old enough to fetch water and bring lunch to Papa while he worked. That morning, the sun hadn't yet burned off the frost clinging to the tips of the grass. I watched from the porch as my father slung a worn sack of seeds over his shoulder, hoe in one hand, jug of creek water in the other. He looked tired, the way all fathers looked in those parts, stooped by labor, not years. He gave me a nod, the kind that meant, "Be good, girl." And then he walked out into the rows he had carved from clay and stone with his bare hands. He never came back. They said it was a copperhead. He must have startled it while he was reaching into the rows for weeds. The snake sank its fangs into his forearm and slithered off into the brush. By the time my oldest brother Sebastian found him, his lips were already blue. We didn't have a car. We didn't have a phone. The closest hospital was 20 miles away. And even if we had managed a wagon, it would have been too late. He died in the dirt. The same dirt he had worked to feed us. The same dirt we'd plant tomatoes in the next week. The same dirt where we buried him in a handmade box beside the apple tree. It's strange the way grief settles into a house. For a while it's loud. People come. Neighbors bring pies and casseroles muttering, "So sorry, so young." But then they leave. The food runs out. The silence swells. And what's left behind is the way everything shifts. My mother didn't cry. Not in front of us, at least. She scrubbed laundry harder than ever, like she could wash the ache out of her bones. Her hands cracked and bled from the cold water. Her back curled tighter with every passing day. Sebastian was 19 and suddenly overnight it seemed he was no longer our brother. He was the man of the house. A title no one gave him aloud, but everyone understood. He filled it like he'd been waiting for it. First it was small things. He sat at the head of the table. He ate first. He made decisions. When to plant, what to sell, how much corn to dry. He spoke louder. Walked harder. Slammed doors when no one answered fast enough. But then came the whiskey. I didn't know where he got it. We were too poor to waste coins on spirits. But he always came home with it. On his breath, in his blood. In the way his jaw clenched like a trap ready to snap. The first time he hit our brother Joseph, it was over something stupid. Muddy boots inside the house. Joseph was 16 strong, but he didn't raise a hand back. Sebastian had Papa's old belt in his hand, and we all watched frozen as leather met flesh. My mother said nothing. She just kept sewing by the window, stitching a hole in Francis's shirt like the sound of blows wasn't splitting the air behind her. I started waking up with a knot in my stomach every morning. A feeling like something bad was waiting at the bottom of each day. I stopped asking questions. I stopped laughing. And the silence grew thicker. There were 11 of us, all trying to find space in a house built for half as many. But somehow I had never felt more alone. Papa had been a hard man, sure. He didn't smile much. He didn't say, "I love you." But he never hit us. He had rules. He had presence. His voice meant something. When he said your name, you stood still. Sebastian, though, he had something else. Power without balance. Anger without grief. And no one to check him. That's when I first learned. When a father dies, he doesn't just leave behind a body. He leaves behind a silence. And sometimes the wrong person steps in to fill it. There were moments I'd catch my mother looking at Sebastian when he thought she wasn't watching. Her eyes, once so sharp and tired, looked frightened, like she was calculating something. But she never said a word. And perhaps in her silence, I understood that my safety was no longer guaranteed. That childhood, as I knew it, had ended not with a birthday or a milestone, but with a single snakebite in a field. It wasn't just grief that came after my father died. It was chaos. It was fear. It was the slow, steady unraveling of everything I thought I could trust. I used to think home was made of walls and roofs, but I learned that home is made of people. And when the person holding it together is gone, the house doesn't fall all at once. Cracks. Quietly. In corners. In small moments. Until one day, you realize it isn't home anymore. It's just a place where things happen to you. And you learn to endure them. Because that's all you've got left. I wish I could say someone stepped in. A teacher, a neighbor, a priest. But no one came. No one even asked. And so the days continued. The corn grew tall. The beans climbed their sticks. The sun rose and set. And the house grew darker. Not from the lack of light, but from the things that began to happen in its shadows. But that part comes next. There's a silence that lives inside children who've been hurt by the ones they're taught to trust. It isn't just the silence of words unsaid. It's the silence of breath held too long, of footsteps measured, of smiles that disappear the moment backs are turned. That silence moved into my bones the night Sebastian came into the room while Mama was away. It was late, deep in the belly of the night. I was 12. Mary was 14, April 13, and Peter, our baby brother, just 6, was asleep beside me. The door creaked and I woke to the smell of something bitter. Whiskey, sweat, and tobacco. I barely had time to blink before a rough hand clamped over my mouth. "If you scream," Sebastian hissed, his voice slurred, "I'll hurt Peter." I didn't scream. What followed is something I will never fully find words for. Pain, yes. Confusion. A splitting between body and soul. It was as if my mind left me, floated up into the rafters and watched from above, waiting for it to end. When it did, he pulled away, straightened his shirt and said, "This stays between us. No one will believe you. And next time it'll be worse. He left like he had only borrowed something he felt entitled to. And I lay there, blood running down my legs, unable to move. Not just from pain, but from the kind of shock that melts through you like acid. Slow, invisible, and permanent. The next morning I couldn't meet Mama's eyes. I thought surely she would notice. The way I limped. The way my voice was a whisper. But she didn't. Or maybe she did. And chose not to see. I told myself it was a one-time horror. That he'd been drunk. That he'd regret it. But a week later he came again. Same threats. Same hands. Same look in his eyes, like I was no longer human. Just a thing he could use in the dark and ignore in the daylight. After that it became routine. Whenever Mama stayed overnight to care for one of her employers, I'd lie awake, frozen, waiting. Some nights he didn't come. And those were the worst. Because the dread of when was worse than the knowing of now. One evening after weeks of this torment I saw Mary, the oldest of us girls, washing sheets down at the creek, scrubbing furiously with lye soap. There were blood stains. Her hands shook. Her face was blank. That's when I knew. It wasn't just me. I tried to talk to her later, whispering when the others were asleep. Does Sebastian come to you too? She didn't answer. But she didn't need to. The way her eyes filled and didn't spill, that was enough. We were both trapped in the same nightmare. It's strange how quickly horror becomes routine. We made up excuses for bruises. We stopped speaking too much. We became shadows in our own home. When I finally gathered the courage to tell Mama, when I whispered to her while helping hang laundry, Sebastian is doing bad things to me at night. She paused, stared out at the horizon. Then, without even turning, she said, "Better you than me, girl. That's just how men are. Learn to bear it in silence." Those words, they carved something out of me. That was the moment I stopped being a child. Not when I bled. Not when I was violated. But when I realized that the one person who was supposed to protect me, the one who gave me life, wouldn't even try. And maybe I thought she had gone through it too. Maybe she had learned to survive by forgetting, by folding herself into numbness. But that didn't make it right. It didn't stop what came next. Because predators never stop where they start. When I was 13, Anthony, 17 at the time, cornered me behind the house. He didn't ask. He didn't care. He just took. And when I cried, he slapped me. Said, "You're already doing it with Sebastian. Don't act innocent." As if I had chosen any of it. As if I had opened some door willingly. And then Joseph. And Francis. By the time I was 14, 4 of my brothers had taken what wasn't theirs. Each one, when they began, said the same thing. "If you've done it with the others, you'll do it with me too." They spoke like I was filth. Like I was the reason for their sickness. And when I cried, they hit me harder. I learned to stop crying. At school, I made up stories about falling downstairs. I laughed when the teacher asked if I was okay. And every time I washed away blood from myself, I stared into the water and wondered if anyone would ever know who I used to be. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't yet imagine, was that this would not be my ending. That deep within the silence they forced on me, a voice was growing. A seed of fire. A whisper. No more. Not yet. Not that year. But one day. And when that day came, I would not just survive. I would make sure the world knew what monsters can grow inside a house with no doors to truth. And what strength it takes to walk out. Not just alive, but whole. By the time I turned 16, my body was no longer just mine. It was a battlefield. Bruised, bloodied, and battered too many times to count. The nights blurred together in the same way the bruises did. Overlapping, fading before a new one formed. But one thing didn't fade. The nausea. The missed cycles. The strange way my skin felt tighter across my belly. First, I told myself it was just exhaustion. That maybe I was coming down with something. That surely I couldn't be pregnant. But denial doesn't hold for long when your belly starts to swell. And the truth, like the baby inside me, grew louder with every passing week. By the 5th month, I could no longer hide it. Not under Mama's 2 big dresses. Not behind loose aprons. My body had spoken. And the house, already cruel, grew colder. Mama noticed first. One night, as I bent to stir the beans in the pot, her eyes narrowed. She didn't say anything until later, when we were alone in the kitchen, the others out in the fields. "You," she hissed, her voice sharp as broken glass. Been spreading your legs and now bringing another mouth for us to feed?
I stared daher, horrified. Mama,
Don't, she snapped. Don't start with your lies. I don't want to know who. Probably some boy in town. You think you're special? You think men do things for free? I tried to explain. To say it wasn't my choice. That it was Sebastian. That it was Anthony. That it was Joseph. That it was Francis. That it was them. But she didn't want the truth. The lie was easier to live with. And the worst part? The rest of them joined in. None of my brothers claimed responsibility. Of course not. In front of Mama, they acted like I'd betrayed the family. Like I was a shame. Like the baby I carried didn't carry their blood. Sebastian spat at my feet. Anthony wouldn't look at me. Joseph called me filth. Francis laughed. The abuse stopped for a time. Maybe because the growing belly disgusted them. Or maybe because they didn't want to hurt the baby. Or maybe, just maybe, they were planning something worse. Because while their hands left me alone, their words did not. Whore. Liar. Disgrace. I was no longer allowed to sleep in the room with my sisters. They made me a corner in the kitchen, next to the wood stove beside the pantry, where the rats skittered at night. They fed me last. Sometimes not at all. But something strange happened in those months. Something I didn't expect. I began to love the baby growing inside me. It started with a flutter, like wings brushing gently against the inside of my skin. Then came the kicks, the hiccups, the quiet, wordless conversations I whispered at night. I'll protect you, I'd murmur, my hands over the curve of my stomach. You and me were going to be okay. It was a promise made in the dark. Prayer I wasn't sure I could keep. And then one night Mama came to me. Not with softness. Not with help. But with instructions. You'll give birth in the shed, she said. When the time comes. I don't want blood and screaming in this house. The shed had once been for pigs. Long before we sold them to pay for coal. Now it was just rotting boards, straw, dirt, and the smell of years gone stale. I said nothing. There was no point. Instead I began preparing. Quietly, secretly. I hid old rags under the floorboards. Saved bread crusts for strength. Stashed away a rusty knife I found in the yard to cut the cord. I even lined one corner of the shed with clean straw, as clean as I could find. I was terrified, but also determined. If I couldn't stop the horror I'd lived through, then maybe I could protect this child from it. The pain came one night in late July. It started in my lower back, dull, rhythmic. Then it gripped my entire body like a storm. I waited until everyone was asleep before I slipped out, barefoot, into the night. The shed was dark, colder than I expected. The straw I prepared scratched at my skin as I lay down, panting, sweating, shaking. There was no one to guide me.
no me duife.
No mother's hand. No soothing words. Just me. And the pain. And the child I had vowed to bring into this world with love, even if the world itself had none. Hours passed. I bit down on a piece of cloth to keep from screaming. My hands clawed at the dirt floor as wave after wave of contraction hit me. And then, sometime just before dawn, she arrived. A tiny, squirming, slippery miracle. Red and wailing. Covered in the white film of new life. A girl. I laughed. I cried. I didn't know what I felt. But I knew this. She was mine. I used the rusty knife to cut the cord. Cleaned her as best I could. Wrapped her in the cloth I had hidden away. And I held her close, pressing my face to her tiny head. Shua, I whispered. Mama's here. Mama's got you now. I named her Mary Elizabeth. Mary for the mother of Jesus. Elizabeth because somehow it felt holy. We stayed there for hours. Just the two of us. Two fragile souls in a pig shed. One born of violence. The other of impossible love. Later that morning Mama came. She stood at the door, arms crossed. Is it over? She asked. I nodded. She looked at the bundle in my arms for a moment. Just a moment. And then said, clean up the mess. And don't let her cry. I don't want questions. She turned and walked away. That was the only acknowledgement Mary Elizabeth would ever get from her grandmother. But it didn't matter. Because in my arms she was safe. For now. I didn't know what would come next. I didn't know how I'd feed her. How I'd hide her. How I'd protect her from the same monsters who had hurt me. But I knew I would try. With every breath. With every scrap of strength left in my broken body. Because in that moment I was no longer just Geraldine. I was Mama. And for the first time in years I felt something close to whole. Even in a pig shed. Even in the dirt. Even if just for a little while. For nearly 3 months I lived between two worlds. By day I was the quiet girl sweeping floors, hauling water, stirring beans, pretending my back wasn't broken from childbirth and my breasts weren't leaking milk. By night I became whole again. Because night belonged to Mary Elizabeth. After everyone had gone to sleep, I would tiptoe out to the shed. There in a bed of straw softened with torn cloth and love she waited, wrapped tightly in an old quilt I'd sewn from rags. Her tiny eyes searched the dark like they could see me before I even stepped inside. Sometimes she'd coo. Other nights she'd cry the second she sensed I wasn't there. I learned how to hold her close while I worked, nursing her when no one was looking, humming lullabies in whispers. I carried a scrap of flannel with my scent on it and tucked it beside her during the day when I had to be away. It calmed her, maybe the way her touch calmed me. She was the first thing in my life that ever looked at me with pure love.
No judgment.
No cruelty. No expectation. Just warmth. Need. Trust. We were all each other had. And that's why I was so careful. So impossibly careful. But secrets like babies don't stay quiet forever. It happened on an October afternoon. The sun was hot, far too hot for fall, and I had been out in the field picking potatoes with Paul and Benedict, two of my younger brothers who up until then hadn't joined the abuse. My body still ached from childbirth and I was pushing myself too hard. But I didn't care. I just wanted to finish fast, get back to the shed before Mary Elizabeth woke. But that day I was too late. I heard the scream before I saw anything. It wasn't Mary's. It was Sebastian's. Sharp. Ugly. Shouting from the yard like he'd stepped on a rattlesnake. I dropped the potato basket and ran. My heart pounded so hard it nearly silenced everything else. But the closer I got, the clearer I could hear it. Mary Elizabeth wailing, desperate, terrified. Then I saw her. In Sebastian's hands. Held out in front of him like a thing. A cursed object. A piece of filth. Her tiny body shook in his grip. Her little arms flailing as she cried harder than I'd ever heard her cry. "So this is what you've been hiding," he growled. I couldn't breathe. I stumbled toward him, arms outstretched. "Please," I begged. "She's just a baby. Please don't hurt her." He sneered. "You really thought you could keep this secret? In my house? Under my nose?" Anthony and Joseph emerged from the porch. Mama stood in the doorway, silent, her face a blank sheet of stone.
No, he whispered.
"Please, she's yours. She's your blood." "She's nothing," Sebastian barked. "A bastard. A disgrace." He shoved her into Anthony's arms like a sack of corn. "Get rid of it. Tonight." "No." I screamed and lunged forward. But Francis caught me from behind, his arms wrapping around me like chains. "You don't get to decide anything anymore," he muttered. "You should have known better. She's just a baby." I cried. "She hasn't done anything, please don't." Mama still hadn't moved. I looked at her. My mother. The woman who gave me life. The woman who had turned away from every scream I had ever swallowed. "She's your granddaughter," I said, barely able to speak through the sobs. "You can't let them do this." But her eyes didn't meet mine. She stared at the ground, at the wall, at her hands, anywhere but at me. That silence said everything. I don't know what hurt more, Sebastian's threats, or Mama's refusal to lift a single finger. I collapsed when they let me go. Fell straight to the dirt like the life had drained out of me. My hands dug into the earth, useless. They were going to take her. My baby. My daughter. The only pure thing in that cursed house. They didn't even wait for nightfall. Anthony disappeared with her down the long dirt road toward town. I tried to follow, dragging myself to my feet. But Francis pushed me back hard. "One more step and we'll bury you beside her." That night I didn't sleep. I curled into the corner of the kitchen, my body still soaked in milk meant for a baby who was now gone. The pain of engorgement was excruciating, but I welcomed it. I needed it. It was proof she had existed. That I wasn't imagining those 3 months of whispered lullabies and stolen warmth. I called her name over and over again in my head. Mary Elizabeth. Mary Elizabeth. Mary Elizabeth. I didn't know where she was. But she was still alive. If they'd left her on the church steps. Or in a ditch. Or. I couldn't finish the thought. But I knew one thing. I would find her. I would find her if it took my whole life. But the next day the threats began. You breathe a word of this, Sebastian warned, pressing me against the barn wall. And I'll make sure the next thing you lose isn't a baby. It's your life. He didn't need to say it twice. I had seen what he was capable of. But he underestimated one thing. He thought he had broken me. And in many ways he had. But he had also created something else in me. Not rage. Not revenge. Resolve. Because Mary Elizabeth was out there. And I wasn't going to let her grow up thinking she'd been abandoned. I wasn't going to let her live in a world that didn't know how fiercely she was loved. I didn't sleep for days. I tried to ask around. Discreetly. I asked the traveling salesman who came to sell pots and pans. I asked the egg buyer who passed every Thursday. Did you hear about a baby? A baby girl? Maybe left on church steps? Maybe. But no one had answers. Or if they did, they weren't talking. Sebastian's shadow stretched far. Eventually, even those small attempts caught his attention. He cornered me one night, reeking of whiskey and fury. Still sniffing around, he said. She's gone. Far gone. And if you keep asking questions, I'll make sure you follow her. But something in his voice slipped. He said her. So she was alive. At least for a time. That small unintentional mercy was all I had. And I held on to it with every beat of my heart. I don't remember how long I cried that night. I just remember rocking back and forth on the kitchen floor, my arms empty but aching with the memory of her weight, my breasts leaking milk I had no way to release. And I remember whispering again and again into the dark, I'll find you, baby girl. Even if I have to cross the whole damn world. I will find you. Grief settles into the bones differently when it's mixed with fear. After Mary Elizabeth was taken, I became a ghost inside that house, alive but hollow. My breasts ached and leaked for a child I could no longer nurse. My belly, still soft from birth, felt heavier now from sorrow than from life. But the world around me didn't stop. The firewood still needed chopping. The dishes still needed scrubbing. And the people who had stolen my child still sat at the dinner table every night like nothing had happened. That was the part that turned my grief into something else, something sharper. They joked. They ate. They lived. And I watched the sun rise and set with no hope. Only one quiet decision, forming clearer by the day. I had to leave. But I waited. Waited for the right moment. Waited for a sign. Waited until I could move without a trail of blood in the snow behind me. And then, one morning I woke up sick. Not grief sick. Not hunger sick. Pregnant sick. I vomited behind the shed, my fingers trembling as I held my skirt out of the way. My stomach turned not just from the nausea, but from the truth I didn't want to name. It had happened again. Despite my fear. Despite the bleeding. Despite the fact that my body was still healing from the last time, it had happened again. Sebastian. Anthony. Joseph. Francis. Who could say which? They had started visiting me again a few weeks after Mary was taken. As if nothing had changed. As if they had only pressed pause. This pregnancy, it was another curse. Another sentence. But this time I was already planning my escape. And this only sharpened the need. I didn't tell anyone. Not until Mama caught me vomiting behind the chicken coop. She looked at me with the same cold eyes she always had since Papa died and said, "You're carrying again." I didn't deny it. Just nodded. She didn't scold me this time. She didn't spit or scream. She just said, almost in a whisper, "This time they won't let it be born." That night I didn't sleep. Every creak of the wood outside the kitchen made my heart seize. They were going to kill me. Not just the baby me. And the next night I got proof. Dinner was quiet. Too quiet. The stew was already on the table when I sat down. My bowl was fuller than usual, thick with chunks of meat we hadn't had in weeks. I looked at it and then I looked at Sebastian. He was watching me. Not eating. Not even pretending. Just waiting. "Eat," he said. "You need it with that thing growing inside you." I pushed the spoon aside and stood up. "I'll eat later." He didn't stop me. Didn't need to. The message was clear. They'd poisoned the food. Maybe not enough to kill me instantly, just enough to take the baby. To make it look like one of those things. Miscarriage. Bleeding. Death. But they had underestimated me again. I wasn't the same girl who had sobbed at their threats months ago. I wasn't even the same girl who had given birth in a shed. I was something else now. A mother who had already lost too much. That night I packed. Not much. A piece of bread. A threadbare coat. A hidden pouch of coins I'd been collecting for months. Tips from neighbors, coins found in the dirt. A silver button traded for a nickel. And then I waited. Waited until the house was asleep. Until the snoring filled the walls like a lullaby of monsters. Then, barefoot and shaking, I opened the door. The air outside was cold. Not yet winter, but close enough to bite. I wrapped my arms around myself and stepped into the night. I didn't cry. I didn't look back. I just walked. One foot after another, down the dirt road. Away from the only life I'd ever known. And into the dark unknown. Behind me was pain, loss, betrayal. But ahead of me was something else. Not safety, maybe. Not comfort. But freedom. And the chance, just the chance, to become something more than what they tried to destroy. That night, with the stars overhead and the gravel cutting my feet raw, I wasn't a victim. I wasn't a child. I was a survivor. And I would never let them own another piece of me again. The road into town was longer than I remembered. Maybe because my feet were bleeding. Maybe because every step pulled at something deep inside me. Fear, grief, determination all knotted together. Or maybe it just felt longer because for the first time I was walking it alone. No brothers. No mama. No child in my arms. Just me. And the baby I hadn't asked for growing quietly inside me. Reminding me with every cramp and twist that time was short. By the time I reached the edge of Lexington, the sun was rising. My legs trembled. My lips were cracked from thirst. I had slept in a ditch the night before, curled against a tree like a wounded animal. I hadn't eaten in 2 days. But still I kept walking. I didn't know where I was going. I had no plan. No name. No address. Just one instinct that carried me forward. Find a church. Not because I believed God would save me. He hadn't before. But because churches had walls. And people. And maybe if I was lucky, a door that didn't lock behind me. I wandered the main street like a ghost. Heads down, eyes avoiding mine. I must have looked wild. Mud on my hem, blood on my ankles, hair tangled like old straw. But I didn't care. And then I saw it. Stone walls. A steeple. A wooden sign that read St. Mary's Parish. I walked straight through the doors. The church was empty. Cool. Still. Dust motes danced in the morning light, slicing through the stained glass windows. The scent of candle wax and old wood filled my lungs. I made it to the front pew and collapsed, not from reverence but because my knees simply gave out. And there, on the cold tile floor, I finally let go. The sobs came hard. From my belly. From my bones. All the cries I hadn't let escape in that house, in that shed on that road. They poured out now in front of that silent altar. I wasn't praying. I was unraveling. Please, I whispered into the empty space. Please help me. I don't know who I'm asking. But I can't do this alone anymore. I don't remember how long I lay there. Minutes. Hours. Maybe only seconds. But then, I felt a hand on my shoulder. Gentle. Firm. Human. I flinched. Turned. A woman in a black and white habit stood above me. Her eyes soft with concern. Not judgment. Not suspicion. Just concern. My child, she said. Are you hurt? I nodded. I think I'm losing the baby. She didn't ask why. She didn't ask who. She didn't make me explain. She called for help. Lifted me as gently as she could, with arms surprisingly strong. Another sister brought blankets. Water. A warm cloth for my forehead. And when I passed out from pain and blood loss, it was her voice I heard last. You are safe now. I promise. When I woke again, I was in a small infirmary. Clean sheets. White walls. A ceiling fan spinning slow and steady above me. My belly was flat again. Too flat. I didn't need anyone to say it. The baby was gone. Tears filled my eyes, but they didn't fall. I had none left to give. The same sister from the church sat beside me, her hands folded in her lap. She smiled softly when I stirred. "I'm Sister Grace," she said. "You're safe here. No one is going to hurt you." I didn't believe her, not yet. But I wanted to. Over the next days, she and the other nuns cared for me. They cleaned my wounds, fed me warm broth, gave me clothes that didn't scratch my skin or reek of firewood smoke. They didn't ask questions, at least not at first. And when I was strong enough to sit up, to walk slowly across the room without fainting, Sister Grace brought a chair to my bedside. "Do you want to tell me what happened?" she asked. And I did. Not all at once. Not everything. But enough. She listened the way no one ever had. Not with pity. Not with shock. But with sorrow. And stillness. And something else I couldn't quite name. Maybe it was mercy. Maybe it was love. She didn't offer easy answers. Didn't tell me to forgive or forget. She just held my hand when I cried. Stayed silent when I had no words. And when I asked if I could stay, just for a little while, she nodded without hesitation. "Yes, child," she said. "For as long as you need." I didn't know it then, but that moment was the beginning of something new. Not a miracle. Not a redemption arc wrapped up with a bow. But the first brick in a foundation I would build with my own two hands. And for the first time in my life, I believed there might be a way forward. Not away from the pain, but through it. Healing doesn't happen all at once. It doesn't come like a sunrise, sudden bright hole. Comes like a slow thaw. Like snow melting drip by drip after a long, merciless winter. That's how it was for me at St. Mary's. The convent wasn't magic. It didn't erase what I had lived through. It didn't bring back my children. But it gave me space. Space to breathe. To be quiet. To be seen not as a disgrace, not as a burden, but as someone who deserved to be there. Sister Grace never asked more than I was ready to give. She let me move at my own pace. Sometimes that meant I spent an entire day folding sheets in silence. Sometimes it meant I talked until my throat hurt. Other times I simply sat in the chapel, staring at the flicker of candlelight, asking questions I didn't expect answers to. Why me? Why didn't anyone help? Where is she now, Mary Elizabeth? For a long time I carried hate in my chest like a hot coal. Not just for my brothers. Not just for my mother. But for myself. I hated that I hadn't screamed louder. That I hadn't run sooner. That I couldn't protect the babies who had come from my body and vanished into a world too cruel to hold them. Sister Grace sensed it. One evening after Vespers, she sat beside me in the garden, where the marigolds were just starting to bloom. "You know," she said gently, "hate is a heavy thing to carry." I didn't answer. She let the silence grow like a seed, then added, "You don't have to let it go all at once. But know that it will try to root itself in your soul if you don't start pulling it out, little by little." I looked at her, tears welling up. "But it's the only thing I have left." She reached over and touched my hand. "No," she said. "You have breath. You have a heart that still beats. You have a story that hasn't ended yet. You have you." Her words settled into me like rain on parched earth. I didn't sleep much that night. Instead, I thought about what it meant to live without hate. Not forget. Not excuse. But release. Release the grip their violence had on my every thought. Release the belief that I would always be what they told me I was, used, ruined, nothing. That next morning, I asked if I could help in the kitchen. Not out of obligation, but because I needed something to do with my hands, with my days, with this life I was slowly reclaiming. Peeling potatoes. Washing linens. Sweeping steps. It was in those small repetitive acts that I found the first peace I'd ever known. And then one afternoon, Sister Grace approached me again. "We help with the orphanage in town," she said. "Sometimes the children need extra hands. Would you be willing?" First I froze. Children. Just the word opened something raw. But then I remembered Mary Elizabeth's tiny fingers curling around mine. Her soft cry. The way her body melted into mine like she belonged nowhere else. I nodded. Yes. That week, I visited the orphanage for the first time. It was noisy, chaotic, sticky with jam and tears and muddy shoes. But when a little girl with big eyes and wild curls reached out and took my hand without asking, something in me cracked, and then settled. Helping her put on her shoes, I realized I could still be a mother. Not to just one child, but to many. Not in the way I once imagined, but in a way that mattered. I wasn't replacing Mary Elizabeth. No one ever could. But I could take the love that had nowhere to go and pour it into someone who needed it. Someone just like I once was, scared, silent, waiting to be seen. The more I worked with the children, the less I dreamed of revenge. And the more I let go of hate, the more room there was for something else. Grace. Not the nun, though she was my lifeline. But the other kind. The kind that doesn't erase the past, but transforms how we carry it. There were still hard days. Nights when I woke up gasping. Mornings when I stared at the floor too long, wondering if I'd ever really be free of those shadows. But now I had tools. I had purpose. I had hope. And though it came slowly, like the thaw, I began to feel warmth again. Not from the sun, but from within. From the slow, quiet truth that I was still alive. Still here. Still capable of loving. And worthy of being loved in return. I never set out to become a voice for anyone. In the beginning, all I wanted was silence, soft, safe, uninterrupted silence. But life, I've learned, has a way of calling you back into sound. Started with one child. Her name was Lila. She was 6 and she didn't speak, not a word. The nun said she'd been dropped off at the orphanage by a distant uncle who disappeared before they could even ask for paperwork. She screamed in her sleep, flinched when anyone raised their voice, wouldn't let anyone touch her, not even the other children. They assigned her to me not because I was trained, but because, as Sister Grace put it, you'll understand her in ways we can't. And I did. Not with words, but with presence. Every morning, I sat beside her during breakfast. Not across. Not over. Beside. I didn't ask her questions. I didn't push her to speak. I just sat. On the 5th day, she handed me her spoon. Just like that. No eye contact. No words. But I knew what it meant. Trust. From there she began sitting closer. Then holding my hand. One night, when the wind rattled the windows and thunder rolled over the hills, she crawled into my lap and whispered, "Don't let them find me." It was the first time I heard her voice. And it broke my heart. Because I knew exactly who them was. I hugged her tighter than I had held anything in years and whispered back, "They won't. I promise." That moment shifted something inside me. Lila wasn't just a child in need. She was me years earlier. She was Mary Elizabeth, never held long enough. She was every girl whose name was forgotten but whose pain lingered. That's when I realized I couldn't stay quiet anymore. Silence had protected me once. But now it was time for something else. I began speaking at community meetings. Quietly at first, about child protection, about trauma, about the difference a single safe adult could make. My voice was soft, unsure. My hands shook. But the stories, they listened to the stories. I told them about Lila. How she smiled when someone remembered her favorite fruit. How she learned to braid hair by watching the older girls. How she had finally started to sleep through the night when someone tucked her in and said, "You're safe." I didn't tell them my story. Not yet. But in every child I spoke about, there was a piece of me. A woman from the county office approached me after one of those meetings. She said, "You have a gift. You make people see what they want to look away from." I wasn't sure if it was a gift. I only knew it was necessary. Soon I was invited to more meetings, schools, churches, small town halls. I spoke about recognizing signs of abuse, about why children act out, about why they go silent, about how the system often fails those who need it most. Then came the day Sister Grace handed me a flyer. It was for a statewide conference on child welfare reform in Frankfurt. "You should go," she said. "Your voice belongs there." I laughed. Me? A girl from a log cabin with no formal education. She smiled gently. A woman who lived through hell and chose not to burn others with her fire, but to light the way. Yes. You. So I went. And for the first time I stood in front of a room full of professionals. Psychologists, policymakers, teachers, and told my truth. Not all the details. But enough. Enough to make them sit straighter. Listen harder. Think deeper. I told them about the silence of rural life. How pain hides behind white picket fences and Sunday dresses. I told them that children don't need saviors. They need consistency, kindness, and adults who show up even when it's uncomfortable. I ended with this. I wasn't saved by a system. I was saved by one woman who listened, and one child who reminded me what love could feel like again. Be that person. Please. When I stepped down from the podium, people stood, clapped. Some even cried. But all I could think about was Mary Elizabeth. Maybe I thought someone like these people met her. Maybe she was one of the lucky ones. From that point on, I wasn't just a helper in the orphanage. I became a bridge. Between the wounded and the world. Between policy and lived reality. Between past and hope. And slowly, without realizing, I had become what I never thought I'd be. A voice. A guide. A protector. Not just for Lila, but for every child whose cries were met with silence. And this time silence would not win. Some stories don't end. They just circle quietly, waiting to be returned to. Mary Elizabeth was that story for me. No matter how much time passed. No matter how many children I held. How many voices I helped lift. There was always a room in my heart where her name lived, untouched by dust or silence. I had learned to live with that ache. To carry it like a folded letter I never opened but also never threw away. And then one autumn afternoon a letter arrived. It was from Judge Lillian Moore, a woman I had met during a child advocacy conference in Washington, D.C. She was quiet, sharp-eyed, and deeply committed to reforming the foster system. We had spoken over lunch, nothing dramatic, just shared ideas, experiences, a few stories. I had told her about Mary Elizabeth. Not everything, but enough. I hadn't expected anything to come of it. But weeks later her letter came. I've requested a preliminary record search in the Lexington area, based on the details you provided. Nothing definitive yet. But if you are willing to pursue this, I believe we can dig deeper. My hand shook as I read it. 40 years had passed. What were the odds? No legal adoption.
No dokumentación.
She was likely handed over in secret, in shame and silence. Still I couldn't ignore it. Maybe I would find nothing. Maybe she was gone. But maybe, just maybe, I could at least know what happened. I wrote back immediately. And so began the slow, shadowed work of tracing what no one wanted to remember. Judge Moore warned me. The trail would be thin. In the 1960s, backdoor adoptions were common in rural America. No background checks.
No paperwork.
Sometimes just a quiet exchange and a whispered agreement between families. But she was determined. And so was I. Together we created a map, dates, locations, physical details, possible surnames, rumors I half remembered from my brother's drunken conversations. Every few weeks a letter would arrive with updates. One child was placed with a farm couple outside of town in late '65. A baby girl, no birth certificate. No medical records. The timing matched. The town matched. But there were no names. No photos.
No proof.
We tried again. And again. For every door we knocked on, 5 more stayed bolted shut. Some families denied everything. Others were simply gone, moved, passed away, disappeared into time. I kept telling myself I would stop. That I should stop. That it wasn't fair to keep dragging hope through the mud like this. But the heart doesn't work that way. Every time I saw a woman around Mary Elizabeth's age, on a bus, in the grocery store, walking with a child of her own, I wondered, was it her? Did she feel something too when our eyes met? Could a child remember the shape of a mother's arms, even if only held for 3 months? Then came the phone call. It was Judge Moore. I think we found someone, she said quietly. A woman in her late 50s, adopted informally by a childless couple in Winchester. No records, just a family Bible with her name and a date of arrival. October 19, 1965. The date Mary Elizabeth disappeared. Her adoptive name was Elise. She was raised as an only child, now working as a librarian. No children of her own. No known biological history. Just a faded memory of being told she was a gift from a girl who couldn't keep her. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just listened to my own heartbeat in the silence. She's open to meeting you, Judge Moore added gently. But only if you're sure. I said yes. And then I waited. Days passed like years. On the day of the meeting, I arrived at the little coffee shop early. Too early. My hands shook as I held my tea, my eyes scanning every person who walked through the door. And then there she was. Medium height. Dark hair. Freckles scattered like stars across her cheeks. Her eyes locked on mine. Neither of us moved at first. Then she walked over, slow and unsure, and said softly, "Are you Geraldine?" I nodded. She sat down across from me, and for a long moment we just looked at each other. Not with certainty, not even with recognition, but with curiosity and something older, deeper. I didn't expect a miracle. I didn't expect her to cry or call me mom or forgive the world on the spot. And she didn't. But she listened. I told her what I could. About the cabin, the birth, the shed, the day they took her. I told her that I had searched, not always with maps or names, but with my heart every day of my life. And when I finished, she was quiet. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of cloth. I don't know if this means anything, she said. But my mother, the one who raised me, always kept this in my drawer. Said it came with me. Said the girl who gave me away had wrapped me in it. I opened the cloth. It was worn, frayed at the edges. But I knew the stitching. The tiny blue flowers. I had sewn it from old curtains when I was 16. I had wrapped Mary Elizabeth in it the night she was born. I looked up at her and saw my daughter. Not just in her face, but in the way she held her hands. The way her voice trembled. The way she blinked fast when overwhelmed. And she was real. She was alive. And she was sitting in front of me. I don't know what this means for us, she said quietly. But I'm glad you came. I reached across the table and for the first time in 57 years, I touched my daughter's hand. I've waited a lifetime to say this, I whispered. I love you. And she didn't pull away. It's strange, isn't it? How you can spend a lifetime longing for a moment. And when it finally comes, it doesn't arrive with trumpets or thunder. Just as quiet, ordinary. A table in a coffee shop. 2 cups cooling between 2 strangers who aren't strangers at all. After our first meeting, Mary Elizabeth, Elise as she still called herself, didn't rush into anything. Neither did I. She thanked me for coming and I thanked her for listening. We exchanged phone numbers.
No promises. No te'r felimbrasis.
Just a quiet understanding that this was too big to name all at once. That was enough. In the weeks that followed we talked. Sometimes by phone. Sometimes over lunch. She told me about her childhood, strict but stable. Her adoptive parents were good people by all accounts. Simple, quiet Kentuckians who couldn't have children and believed they were doing something kind by taking her in. They loved her in their own way, but they never spoke much about where she came from. That silence had shaped her, left a hollow she had never quite been able to explain. Until now. I told her what I could. Not everything. Some wounds were still too raw. Some parts of the story felt like mine to carry, not hers to inherit. But I gave her the truth where it mattered. That she was conceived in pain but born in love. That I had fought for her, hid her, named her, held her close every night for 3 months, whispering prayers into her tiny ear. That losing her nearly destroyed me. She listened. Sometimes quietly, sometimes with tears in her eyes. Other times she asked questions I couldn't answer. Why didn't anyone help you? Why didn't they want me? Why didn't you try to find me sooner? The last one hurt most. Because I had. In my heart, in every orphanage I walked into, in every child I held. I had looked for her in the eyes of strangers, in the shadows of my dreams. But life had stolen the map, and I'd been left to trace outlines in the dark. I never stopped wanting to find you, I told her once. I just didn't know if I was allowed to hope anymore. She nodded and I think she understood. A few months later, she invited me to meet the woman who had raised her. Mrs. Ashby was in her 80s now, living in a small nursing home outside of Winchester. Frail. Confused at times. But when I walked in, she smiled and said, "You must be Geraldine." Stopped me in my tracks. "I always wondered if you'd come," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She had your eyes, you know. From the very beginning." We sat by her bedside for nearly an hour. She told me how she'd received a call from a friend who knew of a baby in danger and needed someone to take her quickly, no questions asked. That friend never gave names. No one ever came back. She had wondered, over the years, about the girl's mother. Where she'd gone. Why she had left. If she had regretted it. "I never blamed you," she said softly. "Not once." And with those words, something in me finally exhaled. That night, Elise and I walked through the crisp Kentucky twilight, side by side. "I used to think I didn't want to know where I came from," she said. But now I think, maybe I needed to. I nodded. We all do sooner or later. We didn't talk about what we would be to each other. Not mother and daughter, not exactly. Too much time had passed. Too much had been stolen. But something was growing between us, tentative, fragile, real. We began writing letters to one another, yes, letters even in the age of email and texting. There's something sacred about handwriting, about ink and paper, about taking time to choose your words. In mine, I told her about the children I had raised at the orphanage, about Sister Grace and her garden full of marigolds, about the way healing had taken its time with me, but had never stopped. In hers, she told me about her library, her love for poetry, her fear of becoming a mother because she had no mother to model after. I reminded her that motherhood isn't biology, it's presence. And she reminded me that love, when given freely, can build bridges across decades. One Sunday morning, she came to visit the convent. She sat with me in the chapel where I had once knelt, broken and bleeding. She ran her fingers across the wooden pews and whispered, "So this is where you became you." I smiled. This is where I started to. Later, in the orphanage garden, one of the girls came running to me with a scraped knee and tear-filled eyes. I crouched, wiped the blood gently, kissed her forehead. Elise watched. "You do it so naturally," she said. "I learned from instinct," I replied, "and from remembering how it felt when no one cared." She knelt beside me, held out her hand to the child. "Hi," she said. "I'm Elise." The girl looked at her, then to me, unsure. "It's okay," I said. "She's family." And just like that, we were. Not in the way I once dreamed, but in the way that matters. Two women. Two timelines. Two lives tied by blood, torn by violence, stitched together again with time, truth, and tenderness. Not a perfect reunion, but a beginning. And for the first time in a long, long time, that was enough. There's a river that runs behind the convent. It's not wide or deep or famous, but it knows everything. It knows my footsteps from when I was 17 and first arrived with nothing but a body torn from childbirth and a soul hanging by a thread. It remembers the nights I sat by its edge, praying without words, hoping the water could wash away what no one else could see. And now at 78 I walk slower. My bones ache in the mornings. My hair has faded to white, and the girls at the orphanage call me Grandma Sister, even though I was never anyone's grandmother in the traditional sense. But the river still remembers. And I've come to believe that's enough. The last 2 decades have been a quiet miracle. After Elise and I found one another again, we didn't try to rewrite time. We simply began where we were. She came every Christmas. We wrote letters, sometimes met for tea. She never called me Mom, and I never asked her to. But one day I found a card in my mailbox signed, "With love, your daughter." I kept that card in the pocket of my habit for weeks. Some wounds never fully close, but some begin to hold light. At the orphanage, I stepped back gradually. I trained others. Shared what I had learned not just from books or seminars but from surviving. We created new programs for young girls, especially those who had survived abuse. We built a retreat center with space for them to breathe, to write, to dance, to heal. I watched girls arrive afraid to speak their names, and leave with notebooks full of dreams. One of them, Melissa, came back years later after becoming a social worker. She knelt by my chair and said, "Sister, you didn't just save my life. You taught me how to live." I held her hand and smiled, though my eyes blurred, because I remembered her first day. She wouldn't speak, wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep unless I sat outside her room with a candle flickering. The candle was my promise. Someone is here. You are not alone. As the years passed, the world changed around me. The laws got stronger. The silence around abuse became harder to maintain. More children found voices. More adults listened. Sometimes I even saw a version of myself in young lawmakers or fiery advocates speaking on the news. And I would whisper, "Thank you," into the quiet room. Not because they knew me, but because they carried the torch forward. At 75, I retired fully from the orphanage. The staff threw a surprise celebration. Former children came from all over, some with families of their own. One by one they hugged me, told me stories I'd forgotten. One girl brought me a photo of a quilt. I helped her finish the year she turned 12. She still had it. Another brought her daughter and whispered, "I named her Grace." After the woman you told me saved you. And I cried. Because that's how legacy works. Not in monuments, but in names. In memories. In the gentle ways people choose to live because someone once believed they could. These days my routine is simple. Morning prayers. Afternoon tea. A short walk to the river when my legs allow. Sometimes Elise joins me. She brings wildflowers or poetry books or just herself. We don't talk much during those walks. But there's comfort in the silence. Not the silence of secrets, but the kind that grows between people who no longer need to explain everything. One afternoon she brought a photo album. She had begun searching too, this time for pieces of my past. Birth records. Census logs. Newspaper clippings. She found a blurry black and white photo of me when I was 13 standing outside the old log house. I didn't even know it existed. She had it framed. It now sits on the small table beside my bed, next to a photo of us from last spring, laughing on the convent porch, arms around each other. Time is strange. Sometimes I look at those two pictures and wonder how that girl ever became this woman. And then I remember the river. The way it carves its path over years. Never rushing. Always moving, reshaping rock into softness. That's what life did to me. That's what grace did. Last week, I sat down with the young nun who now leads the orphanage. She asked if I had any regrets. I thought of everything, what was done to me, what I lost, the nights that seemed too long to survive. And then I said softly, no, because even in the dark I was never alone. I had faith, small as a mustard seed, yes, but faith all the same. I had Sister Grace. I had the children. I had a voice that rose slowly but rose all the same. I had Elise. I had the river. Tonight I write this from my room. The sun is setting, painting the sky with strokes of gold and lavender. The chapel bell is about to ring for evening prayer. My hands move slower now, but they remember how to hold a pen. I write not because I expect someone to publish this, but because I want you, whoever you are, wherever you are, to know. You are not your past. You are not what they did to you. You are not broken beyond repair. There is something on the other side of pain. And it is not just survival. It is joy. It is purpose. It is peace. I found mine not by erasing what happened, but by walking through it again and again, until it no longer swallowed me. Until it became just one part of my story, not the whole of it. And if I, a girl who gave birth in a pig shed, who was told she was worthless, who had everything taken from her, if I could find love again, build something beautiful again, then so can you. So will you? I'll go now. The bell is ringing. And the river is calling. It remembers everything. But tonight it carries not my sorrow but my gratitude. Because my story ends not in silence or shame, but in love. And in the letting go.